The flashbulbs exploded like tiny supernovas, each one stealing a piece of her soul she'd never get back. Brigitte Bardot stood at the center of the Cannes Film Festival red carpet, May 1956, surrounded by 3,000 people. Photographers crushed against barricades. Fans screamed her name until their voices cracked. Journalists pushed microphones toward her face like weapons. She smiled. That smile, the one that had launched 1,000 magazine covers, the one that made grown men forget their own names, was perfect, rehearsed, empty. Because at that exact moment, as the crowd roared and the Mediterranean sun blazed overhead, Brigitte felt something warm slide down her cheek. A single tear. No one noticed. How could they? They weren't looking at her. They were looking at what they'd created. The fantasy, the symbol, the thing that existed only in their minds. The real Brigitte, the 21-year-old girl who just wanted someone to ask if she was okay, had become invisible. But this wasn't the first time she'd cried in public. 6 months earlier, Paris had been covered in December frost. Brigitte sat alone in her dressing room at the Olympia Theater, staring at her reflection. The makeup artist had just left. The costume designer had just left. The director had just left. Everyone always left. In 30 minutes, she'd walk onto that stage for the premiere of And God Created Woman, the film that would make her an international sensation, the film that would trap her forever in a role she never auditioned for. Her hands trembled as she touched the red lipstick they'd painted on her. It felt like war paint, like armor she had to wear into battle against an enemy she couldn't name. The door opened. 5 minutes, Miss Bardot, she nodded. The assistant disappeared. And then, sitting there in that expensive dress that cost more than her childhood home, Brigitte buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Deep, choking sobs that shook her entire body. The kind of crying that happens when you realize you've signed a contract you can't escape. The makeup ran. She had to redo it. She had to smile. She had to perform. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching through the door's crack. Roger Vadim, her director and first husband, saw everything. He saw the tears. He saw the breakdown. He saw the real woman beneath the manufactured goddess. And he said nothing, because Brigitte Bardot crying was bad for business. Brigitte Bardot's suffering was a problem that might delay production. Brigitte Bardot being human was an inconvenience to the empire they were building on her body. So he closed the door quietly and walked away. Years later, in a 1982 interview that was buried and forgotten, Vadim would admit, "I saw her break that night. I saw her die a little, and I chose the film over her. We all did." But that confession came too late to matter. The premiere was a disaster disguised as a triumph. The audience stood and applauded for 7 minutes straight. Critics called her a revelation. Producers lined up with contracts. Brigitte left the theater through a back exit, alone, and vomited in an alley behind a dumpster. A photographer found her there 20 minutes later. He raised his camera. She looked up, mascara smeared, lipstick gone, dress stained. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't." He took the photo anyway. That image never saw publication. Not because of mercy, but because her publicist paid him 3,000 francs to destroy the negative. Can't let the world see their goddess on her knees. But the pattern had already begun. By 1957, Brigitte Bardot was the most photographed woman on earth, more than Marilyn Monroe, more than Grace Kelly, more than any actress, model, or public figure alive. An American university study calculated that her image appeared in print media an average of 14 times per day, every day, for 3 consecutive years. That's over 15,000 published photographs of one human being, 15,000 moments captured, 15,000 invasions, 15,000 thefts of privacy disguised as adoration. And in all those images, the glamorous ones, the scandalous ones, the candid ones, that were anything but, not a single photographer ever asked her how she felt. She told a French journalist in 1959, "They take and take and take, but no one ever asks what it's like to be looked at like that, to have strangers think they own you because they bought a magazine." The journalist cut that quote from the article. It was too depressing. What they published instead was her measurements. The loneliness became physical. Brigitte started experiencing what her private doctor later described as dissociative episodes, moments where she'd be in the middle of a scene, surrounded by cast and crew, and suddenly feel like she was watching everything from outside her own body, like she'd become a ghost haunting her own life. It happened during the filming of The Truth in 1960. She was performing an emotional scene, one that required her to cry on command. But when the director called action, something different happened. The tears came, but they wouldn't stop. She cried through the scene. She cried after the director yelled cut. She cried while the crew stood around awkwardly, not knowing what to do with a broken woman when they'd only been hired to work with a star. They had to shut down production for 3 days. The studio told the press she had a mild flu. The truth was that Brigitte had finally cracked under the weight of being seen by millions, but known by no one. Her second husband, Jacques Charrier, found her one night in their Paris apartment, sitting in a bathtub, fully clothed, staring at nothing. "Brigitte," she didn't respond. "Brigitte, what are you doing?" She turned slowly, and he saw her eyes, empty, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything that made her human. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "When I look in the mirror, I see her, not me, her, the thing they created." Jacques tried to help. He really did. But how do you rescue someone from their own reflection? How do you save someone when the whole world has decided who they're supposed to be? Their marriage lasted 18 months. She cried at the divorce hearing, and even the judge looked away. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed about her failed relationships and inability to commit. They analyzed her love life like it was a spectator sport. They debated her choices on television, in newspapers, at dinner parties across Europe. But none of them asked the obvious question: what does it do to a person when their private pain becomes public entertainment? The most heartbreaking moment came in 1963. Brigitte attended a charity gala in Monaco, one of those events where celebrities smile for cameras and pretend to care about causes they'll forget by morning. She wore a white Givenchy gown. Her hair was perfect. Her makeup was flawless. 1,500 people filled the ballroom. At one point during the evening, she excused herself to use the restroom. A young woman, maybe 19, a waitress working the event, was inside, touching up her lipstick. Their eyes met in the mirror. The girl's face went pale. "Oh my God, you're Brigitte Bardot." Brigitte nodded. "I'm sorry. I'll leave." "Wait." Brigitte's voice was soft, almost desperate. "What's your name?" "Marie." "Marie, can I ask you something?" Brigitte turned away from the mirror to face her directly. "Do you have friends? Real friends? People who know the real you?" Marie blinked. Yes. Of course. And they love you? The actual you, not some version of you." "I think so, yes." Brigitte's eyes filled with tears. Right there in that bathroom, in front of a stranger, the most famous woman in the world started crying. "Don't lose that," she whispered. "Whatever you do, don't ever lose that." Then she walked out, leaving Marie standing there in shocked silence. By the time Brigitte returned to the gala, her smile was back in place. Perfect. Empty. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday, January 28, 1964. Brigitte was in her Paris home, alone. The phone had been ringing all morning. Her agent, her publicist, 3 different directors, 2 journalists who'd somehow gotten her private number. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she sat on her bedroom floor with a bottle of sleeping pills in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. For 2 hours, she stared at those pills. 2 hours of weighing the unbearable weight of being Brigitte Bardot against the terrifying unknown of not existing at all. The apartment was silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock her mother had given her years ago. Each tick felt like an accusation. Each second that passed was another second she had to decide whether to keep living a life that didn't feel like hers. She unscrewed the cap. She counted out enough pills to end everything. She raised the first one to her lips. And then she heard scratching at the door. Her dog, a German shepherd she'd rescued 3 months earlier, was pawing at the bedroom door, whining. Brigitte lowered her hand. The dog scratched again, more urgently. She looked at the pills. She looked at the door. Then she set them down, walked to the door, and opened it. The dog rushed in and pressed against her legs, tail wagging, completely unaware that he'd just saved a life. Brigitte sank to the floor and wrapped her arms around him. She cried into his fur for an hour. That was the moment everything changed. 2 months later, Brigitte Bardot announced her retirement from film. She was 29 years old. The media called it shocking. Producers called it financial suicide. Her publicist called it a huge mistake. But Brigitte called it survival. In her final interview as an actress, she said, "I've been surrounded by millions of people my entire adult life, and I've never felt more alone. I choose loneliness on my own terms, over loneliness in a crowd." The journalist asked her to clarify. She refused, because some truths are too painful to explain to people who've never felt them. Brigitte moved to a small house in Saint-Tropez. She cut her hair. She stopped wearing makeup. She adopted more animals, dogs, cats, even a few rescued farm animals. And for the first time in over a decade, she cried without hiding it. She cried when she wanted to cry. She smiled when she actually felt joy. She existed as herself, not as the manufactured goddess the world had built and then abandoned. A neighbor who lived near her in the 1970s later recalled, "I saw her at the market once, buying vegetables. She looked so ordinary, so peaceful. She was wearing old jeans and no makeup, and she was laughing with the vendor about something. I almost didn't recognize her." The Brigitte Bardot I knew from films would never have been caught dead looking like that. But this woman, the real one, she seemed free. The paparazzi still found her sometimes. They'd hide in bushes near her property, hoping to catch a photo of the reclusive former star. But the images they captured, Brigitte in gardening clothes, feeding her animals, living quietly, never sold well. Turns out the world only wanted Brigitte Bardot when she was performing. When she was just being human, she became invisible again. But this time, the invisibility felt like freedom. In 2003, a French documentary filmmaker gained rare access to Brigitte's private archives. Among the thousands of photographs, contracts, and press clippings, he found a journal entry dated December 15, 1956, the night of En God Created Woman's premiere. It read, "Tonight, I became Brigitte Bardot. The real Brigitte disappeared. I watched her die in a dressing room mirror, and no one noticed. They were too busy celebrating the birth of something that would destroy me. I cried tonight, surrounded by 3,000 people. Not a single person saw my tears. I think that's the loneliest feeling in the world, drowning in a sea of people who think they know you." The filmmaker wanted to include this in his documentary. He thought it was powerful, important. Brigitte threatened legal action if he released it. The documentary never aired. The journal entry remained hidden, because even after all those years, Brigitte understood the world didn't want her truth. They wanted the fantasy. The woman who was surrounded by millions but seen by no one taught the world a devastating lesson. Fame is not connection. Adoration is not love. Being looked at is not the same as being seen. Brigitte Bardot had her image captured 15,000 times in 3 years. Her face sold millions of magazines. Her body launched 1,000 imitators. Her name became synonymous with beauty and desire. But it took 40 years before anyone actually looked closely enough to see the tears. By then, she'd already saved herself. The crowd never noticed when she stopped crying. They'd never noticed when she started. And in the end, that invisibility, the same invisibility that had nearly destroyed her, became the gift that set her free. Because when you're no longer performing for an audience that never really saw you, you finally have permission to exist as yourself. Brigitte Bardot spent her last decades doing exactly that, living quietly, loving fiercely, caring for broken things because she understood what it meant to be shattered by a world that only valued your surface. The tears eventually stopped, not because the pain went away, but because she finally found a life where she could cry in private, smile in public, and know the difference between performance and truth. The millions moved on to the next face, the next fantasy, the next person to devour. Brigitte Bardot finally, mercifully, became invisible, and she'd never been happier.